They mocked his overweight wife the moment she stepped through the saloon doors, but before the laughter died, she spoke a single sentence that would silence the entire town. The late afternoon sun slanted through the dusty windows of Red Hollow's only saloon, turning floating motes into drifting sparks of gold. Boots scraped against warped wooden floorboards, and the faint scent of whiskey mingled with leather and dry desert air. Conversation slowed, then faltered altogether, as Daniel Whitmore entered with quiet purpose, his broad Stetson casting a shadow across steady gray eyes. At his side walked his wife, Margaret Whitmore, her blue calico dress simple and neatly pressed, her gloved hands folded with dignified restraint. She moved carefully, her steps soft but unwavering, her chin lifted just enough to meet the world without apology. Yet in Red Hollow, dignity was often mistaken for weakness. A snicker broke the silence near the faro table, followed by another, until laughter rippled through the room like wind over brittle grass. "That's quite a burden you're carrying, Whitmore," one man muttered, his voice thick with cheap bourbon. Another tipped his hat mockingly. "Hope your porch is reinforced, friend." The remarks drew quiet chuckles, sharp and cruel, cutting through the stillness with practiced ease. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he did not rise to the bait. His hand hovered near Margaret's, not to restrain her, but to remind her she was not alone. She gave the faintest nod, her eyes calm as a prairie dawn. Behind the bar, glasses paused mid-polish, and the piano player let his fingers fall still upon the keys. Outside, the wind rattled a loose shutter, its hollow rhythm echoing through the silence like a distant warning. Margaret's presence seemed to gather the light around her, illuminating the silver brooch pinned at her collar, a delicate heirloom shaped like a blooming magnolia. Its polished surface caught the sun, sending a soft gleam across the room. Few noticed it. Those who did failed to understand its meaning. The saloon doors creaked shut behind them, sealing the moment. "You lost your way, ma'am?" a gambler asked with a crooked grin. "Or did you mistake this place for a county fair?" Laughter followed, low and lingering. Margaret paused, her gloved fingers brushing lightly against the brooch. She inhaled slowly, as though drawing strength from the quiet spaces between heartbeats. Daniel shifted beside her, his posture protective but composed, a man who knew that true strength did not need to raise its voice. For a fleeting second, the room held its breath. Dust swirled in the amber light. A chair creaked. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied against the fading day. Margaret lifted her gaze, her eyes clear and steady, reflecting neither anger nor shame. Only a quiet certainty shaped by years the town could not imagine. She stepped forward, her presence commanding attention without demanding it, and in that fragile hush, the laughter faltered, replaced by something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. Respect waited on the edge of revelation, and the air itself seemed to lean closer, listening, as the woman they had mocked prepared to speak the one sentence that would change everything. The silence lingered like the last glow of sunset stretched across the desert horizon, fragile and trembling, as though the air itself feared to disturb the moment. Margaret Whitmore stood beneath the amber light pouring through the saloon windows, her posture composed, her breathing steady, her gaze unwavering as it moved across the room. The laughter that had filled the space moments earlier now faded into uneasy murmurs, replaced by the quiet rustle of shifting boots and the faint clink of glass against polished wood. Daniel Whitmore remained at her side, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the floorboards, his presence calm and unyielding like a weathered oak standing alone on the plains. He did not speak. He did not need to. His loyalty spoke in the gentle way his hand hovered near hers, close enough to offer strength, yet respectful enough to honor her voice. Beyond them, the patrons of Red Hollow watched with guarded curiosity. Some leaned forward in their chairs, brows furrowed beneath dusty hats. Others avoided her gaze, pretending sudden fascination with their drinks. Outside, the wind whispered along the boardwalk, carrying with it the distant scent of sagebrush and sun-baked earth, while a loose sign creaked rhythmically above the door, marking time like a slow and patient clock. Margaret felt the weight of their judgment, but it did not bend her. She had known harsher winds than mockery and colder nights than humiliation. Her life had taught her that dignity was not granted by others, but carried quietly within, like a flame shielded from the storm. Her gloved fingers brushed lightly against the silver brooch at her collar, its magnolia petals catching the fading sunlight. The metal felt warm against her skin, grounding her in memory. She recalled the miles of open prairie she and Daniel had crossed to reach this town, the endless sky stretching above them, the creak of wagon wheels over dry earth, and the promise of a new beginning whispered beneath starlit nights. Daniel had never once asked her to hide. He had never once flinched beneath the weight of cruel stares. In his eyes, she had always been seen not for her shape, but for her strength. A chair scraped softly as the saloon keeper set down a glass he had forgotten to polish, his eyes fixed on the brooch with dawning uncertainty. The gambler who had mocked her shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his vest as though the room had grown too warm. Even the piano player, his fingers resting motionless upon the keys, watched her with cautious respect. The golden light flickered, illuminating the dust suspended in the air, each particle drifting slowly as if time itself had paused to listen. Margaret lifted her chin slightly, her voice still unspoken but gathering within her like a rising tide. She met the eyes of each man and woman present, not with anger, but with quiet certainty, and in that calm gaze lay a confidence no ridicule could diminish. She understood the power of words spoken with truth. She understood the weight of silence held with grace. And as the last echo of laughter dissolved into the stillness, those who had mocked her began to sense that they were standing at the edge of a revelation, one that would reshape not only their judgment, but their understanding of honor itself. The fading sunlight stretched across the floor until it rested at her feet, as though the west itself bore witness to the moment, and in the hush that followed, every breath in the saloon waited for the words she was about to speak. The stillness in the saloon deepened until it felt as vast as the open plains beyond Red Hollow, pressing gently against every soul present, urging them to listen. Margaret Whitmore drew a slow breath, the soft rise of her shoulders steady and unhurried, as though she stood not in a room of strangers, but beneath a sky she had known all her life. The fading sunlight brushed her face with a warm glow, tracing the calm certainty in her eyes. Daniel Whitmore remained beside her, silent and steadfast, his presence a quiet promise that whatever words followed would not stand alone. A faint gust slipped through the cracks in the wooden walls, carrying with it the dry scent of sage and dust, stirring the hem of her dress and whispering across the worn floorboards. No one laughed now. The gambler lowered his gaze. The bartender stilled his hands. Even the piano player leaned forward, as if the notes of an unseen melody hung suspended in the air. Margaret's gloved fingers rested gently upon the silver magnolia brooch at her collar, its polished surface catching the last rays of the sun like a memory too long forgotten. For a moment, her thoughts drifted to the distant hills of her childhood, to wide verandas shaded by white columns, to the sound of cicadas humming beneath a southern summer sky, and to the quiet lessons of grace and dignity taught by those who came before her. She had crossed 1,000 miles to stand in this room, had endured the weight of whispers and the sting of ridicule, not for pride, but for truth. She lifted her chin slightly, her voice emerging at last, clear and steady as a bell at dawn. "Gentlemen," she said softly, her tone neither sharp nor pleading, but firm with quiet authority, "this town stands upon land that bears my family's name." The words settled over the room like a sudden hush before a storm, simple yet undeniable. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The statement hung in the air, too unexpected to be dismissed, too certain to be ignored. The bartender's eyes widened as he studied the brooch more closely, recognition dawning like the first light over the horizon. The gambler's smirk faltered, replaced by confusion. A ranch hand near the door removed his hat unconsciously, as though an old instinct had stirred within him. Daniel watched his wife with calm pride, the corners of his weathered face softening, for he had always known the strength she carried was not measured by appearance, but by heritage and heart. Margaret allowed the silence to deepen, her gaze unwavering as she met each pair of eyes before her. "My father was Thomas Ashbury," she continued gently, "the man whose survey lines marked these hills before Red Hollow was ever more than a rumor in the dust." The name rippled through the saloon like a forgotten legend recalled at last. Old stories surfaced in hesitant whispers, tales of the Ashbury grant, of deeds signed in careful script, of a family whose holdings stretched farther than the eye could see. The golden light dimmed as the sun sank below the horizon, and with it faded the last remnants of mockery. What remained was awe, fragile and undeniable. Margaret lowered her hand from the brooch, her posture unshaken, her dignity intact. She had not raised her voice. She had not demanded respect. She had simply spoken the truth. And in the quiet that followed, Red Hollow began to understand that honor was not defined by laughter or judgment, but by the courage to stand unbowed when the world expected you to kneel. The name lingered in the saloon like the final note of a hymn, soft yet unshakable, echoing through the minds of those who had once laughed without restraint. Thomas Ashbury. The syllables carried the weight of forgotten maps, sun-bleached deeds, and survey stakes driven into untamed earth long before Red Hollow had drawn its first breath. A quiet murmur stirred among the patrons, hesitant and uncertain, like wind rustling through dry prairie grass. The bartender set down his glass with trembling care, his gaze shifting from Margaret's serene expression to the silver magnolia brooch at her collar, now gleaming with newfound significance. A ranch hand near the door removed his hat, instinctively honoring a name he had only heard in stories told by firelight. Daniel Whitmore stood steady beside his wife, pride warming his weathered features, though he spoke not a single word. He had always known her truth, and he needed no proof beyond her quiet strength. Outside, the evening sky deepened into hues of amber and indigo, casting long shadows across the dusty street as the wind whispered against the saloon's wooden walls. Inside, the gambler who had mocked her earlier shifted uneasily, his confidence dissolving like frost beneath the rising sun. Ashbury, he repeated under his breath, his voice stripped of mockery. The saloon keeper cleared his throat, stepping forward with cautious respect. "Ma'am," he said, his tone subdued. "My father used to speak of that name." Said the Ashbury Grant stretched for miles across this valley before the railroad ever dreamed of reaching these parts. Margaret inclined her head with quiet grace, neither boasting nor condemning. "It did," she replied gently. "My father believed this land would one day become a place where people could build honest lives." The words settled into the room like seeds cast upon fertile soil. A hush followed, heavy with realization. Some glanced toward the floor, ashamed of their earlier laughter, while others studied her with renewed reverence. The piano player, moved by an unspoken impulse, pressed a single soft chord, its melody floating through the air like a benediction. Daniel's hand finally met Margaret's, his calloused fingers enveloping hers with quiet devotion. The touch was neither possessive nor protective, but affirming, a silent vow forged not in pride but in respect. She returned the gesture with a faint, serene smile, her eyes reflecting gratitude rather than triumph. In that moment, dignity filled the space where ridicule had once lingered. The gambler swallowed hard, removing his hat. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and sincere, "it seems we misjudged you." Margaret met his gaze without bitterness. "Perhaps," she answered softly, "but judgment is often born of ignorance. Understanding, however, is born of truth." Her words carried no reproach, only wisdom, and they settled gently upon the hearts of those who listened. The bartender straightened, placing a clean glass upon the counter as a gesture of respect. "Your drink is on the house, Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly. Daniel offered a nod of gratitude, but it was Margaret who spoke. "Kindness," she replied with a warm smile, "is always welcome." Beyond the windows, the last light of day faded behind the distant hills, and the first stars emerged in the vast western sky. Within the saloon, the air felt changed, lighter somehow, as though the town itself had exhaled a long-held breath. Conversations resumed in hushed tones, no longer laced with cruelty, but tempered with humility. As Margaret and Daniel stood together beneath the soft glow of the lanterns, the people of Red Hollow came to understand that true worth could never be measured by appearance, and that honor, like the western horizon, revealed its beauty only to those willing to look beyond the surface. And in the quiet that followed, respect took root where laughter once had, carried gently on the evening wind. The quiet respect that settled over the saloon lingered like the soft glow of lantern light at dusk, gentle yet enduring, as though the very walls of Red Hollow had learned a lesson they would never forget. Conversations resumed in hushed tones, no longer edged with mockery but tempered by reflection, and the patrons cast thoughtful glances toward Margaret Whitmore as she stood beside her husband with serene composure. The bartender polished a glass with deliberate care, his earlier uncertainty replaced by genuine reverence, while the piano player allowed a slow, tender melody to drift through the room, its notes warm as the evening breeze. Outside, the last traces of sunset faded into a velvet sky scattered with stars, and the rhythmic creak of a swinging sign blended with the distant whinny of horses tethered along the dusty street. Daniel Whitmore guided Margaret gently toward a small table near the window, pulling out a chair with quiet courtesy. She accepted with a grateful smile, her gloved hands resting upon the polished wood as she took in the softened expressions around her. No one laughed now. Instead, men who once scoffed removed their hats in silent respect, acknowledging a dignity they had failed to see before. Daniel settled beside her, his posture relaxed yet proud, his weathered features illuminated by lantern light. "You spoke beautifully," he murmured, his voice low and sincere. Margaret met his gaze with warmth. "Truth has a way of speaking for itself," she replied gently, her tone steady as the western horizon. The bartender approached with 2 glasses of cool spring water, setting them down with a respectful nod. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his voice earnest, "Red Hollow is honored by your presence." Margaret inclined her head graciously. "Honor is not given by birth," she answered softly, "but by how we treat one another." Her words carried across the room, settling into the hearts of those who listened like a quiet promise. Near the bar, the gambler who had mocked her earlier shifted uneasily before stepping forward, hat in hand. "Ma'am," he said, his voice tinged with humility, "I owe you an apology. I judged you without understanding." Margaret regarded him with gentle kindness rather than reproach. "Then consider this a new beginning," she replied. "Respect grows where humility takes root." The man nodded, gratitude softening his expression as he returned to his seat. A ranch hand near the doorway spoke in a hushed voice to his companion, recalling tales his father had told of Thomas Ashbury and the vision he had once held for the valley. The stories drifted through the saloon like embers of history rekindled, and with each whispered memory, the name Ashbury regained its rightful place in the town's legacy. Daniel reached for Margaret's hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers with quiet devotion. Their touch was simple, yet it spoke of shared journeys across sun-baked trails, of faith carried through hardship, and of a bond rooted not in appearances but in unwavering respect. She squeezed his hand gently, her eyes shining with gratitude for the man who had always seen her true worth. Outside, a gentle wind swept across the plains, stirring the dust along Main Street, and carrying with it the promise of a new dawn. The lanterns flickered softly, casting warm halos of light that danced upon the wooden walls, illuminating faces no longer hardened by prejudice, but softened by understanding. As the evening deepened, laughter returned to the saloon, quieter now, kinder, free of cruelty. Margaret Whitmore sat in composed serenity, her magnolia brooch gleaming like a symbol of enduring grace, and Daniel watched her with quiet admiration. In that humble room, beneath the glow of lantern light and the vast American sky, Red Hollow discovered that true nobility was not measured by appearance, but by character, and that dignity, once revealed, could transform even the harshest hearts into something gentler, something wiser, something worthy of respect. The gentle hum of conversation drifted through the saloon like a warm prairie breeze, steady and comforting, as the lanterns cast soft halos of light upon the weathered wooden walls. Outside, the stars shimmered across the vast western sky, their quiet brilliance reflected in the dusty street of Red Hollow. Horses shifted in their reins, and the distant call of a night bird echoed across the open plains, a reminder that the frontier never truly slept. Inside, Margaret Whitmore sat with composed grace beside her husband, her presence calm and luminous, as though she carried a fragment of starlight within her. The silver magnolia brooch at her collar glimmered gently, catching the flicker of lantern light like a symbol of enduring heritage. Daniel Whitmore watched her with quiet admiration, his steady gaze filled with pride. He had seen her endure long journeys beneath relentless sun and biting wind, had watched her face judgment with courage and humility, and in that moment he felt a deeper certainty that honor was not bestowed by the world but revealed through character. The bartender approached their table once more, placing a small oil lamp between them, its golden flame illuminating their faces. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "your father's name shaped this valley. My grandfather used to speak of the Ashbury Survey. He said it was drawn with fairness and vision." Margaret inclined her head gently. "My father believed land should be more than property," she replied softly. "He believed it should be a foundation for hope." Her voice carried warmth rather than pride, and those nearby listened with thoughtful reverence. A rancher seated near the window leaned forward, his sunburned hands resting upon his knees. "If that is true," he said, his tone sincere, "then Red Hollow owes your family more than gratitude." Margaret smiled kindly, her expression serene. "Red Hollow owes nothing," she answered. "Kindness and integrity are gifts we offer freely, not debts to be collected." Her words settled into the room with quiet power, dissolving the last remnants of prejudice. Daniel reached for her hand, his touch gentle and reassuring, and she returned it with a grateful squeeze. Their shared silence spoke of trust forged across miles of untamed wilderness and nights spent beneath endless skies. Near the bar, the gambler who had once mocked her spoke again, his voice low with humility. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "this town has seen its share of hardship. Perhaps your presence is the reminder we needed." Margaret regarded him with compassion. "Every town deserves a chance to grow," she replied softly, "and every person deserves the chance to learn." The piano player resumed his melody, the notes drifting through the saloon like a lullaby carried on desert wind. Outside, a cool breeze swept through the open doorway, stirring the edges of Margaret's dress and carrying the scent of sagebrush into the room. The lanterns flickered gently, illuminating faces no longer clouded by judgment but softened by understanding. The saloon keeper raised a glass of water in quiet tribute. "To respect," he said solemnly. Daniel nodded. "To truth," he added. Margaret's eyes shone warmly as she lifted her own glass. "And to dignity," she finished. The simple toast echoed through the room, met with murmurs of agreement. In that humble saloon, beneath the wide American sky, something profound had shifted. Mockery had given way to humility, and suspicion had yielded to respect. As the night deepened, Red Hollow embraced a new understanding born not of force, but of grace. And in the gentle glow of lantern light, Margaret Whitmore sat with quiet poise beside her husband, her presence a testament to the enduring power of truth, proving that the strongest voices are not those that shout, but those that speak with unwavering dignity and are heard in the silence that follows. The melody from the piano drifted softly through the saloon, gentle as a lullaby carried across the prairie, while the golden lantern light flickered against the worn wooden beams. Outside, the night had fully settled over Red Hollow, wrapping the town in a velvet hush beneath a sky scattered with brilliant stars. The desert air cooled, carrying the scent of sagebrush and dust through the open doorway, stirring the edges of Margaret Whitmore's dress. She sat poised beside Daniel, her posture calm and dignified, her presence as steady as the horizon. Conversations resumed around them in respectful tones, each voice softened by reflection, as though the town itself had awakened from a long and thoughtless slumber. Daniel regarded his wife with quiet admiration, his weathered hands resting upon the table, his gaze warm with unwavering devotion. He had ridden across sunburned trails and endured relentless storms, yet nothing filled him with greater pride than the grace Margaret carried into every room she entered. She returned his look with a gentle smile, her eyes shining like starlight, silently thanking him for standing beside her when the world had chosen to judge. Near the bar, the gambler who had once mocked her leaned forward thoughtfully, his hat resting against his chest. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said in a low and respectful tone, "I reckon Red Hollow owes you more than an apology. Perhaps it owes you its future." The words lingered in the air, drawing curious glances from the townsfolk gathered nearby. Margaret's expression remained serene, her voice soft yet certain. "The future of a town," she replied, "belongs not to one family, but to every soul willing to build it with honesty." Her words settled like gentle rain upon parched soil, nourishing something long neglected. The saloon keeper nodded slowly, his lined face softened with understanding. Your father's vision lives on in you, he said quietly. If Thomas Ashbury dreamed of a place built on fairness, then perhaps Red Hollow has a chance yet. Margaret inclined her head, neither accepting praise nor denying it. A dream, she answered, is only as strong as the people who carry it forward. The piano player shifted into a warmer melody, its notes rising and falling like the distant roll of a summer breeze. Outside, a lone horse stamped lightly against the packed earth, its silhouette framed by the silver glow of moonlight. The rhythm of the frontier continued, unchanged yet somehow renewed. A young ranch hand approached timidly, his hat clasped tightly in his hands. "Ma'am," he said, his voice earnest, "my mother always told me that true gentility shows itself in kindness. Tonight, I believe her words." Margaret smiled with quiet warmth. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," she replied. "Remember her lessons, and you will always walk with honor." The young man nodded gratefully before stepping back, his eyes shining with newfound respect. Daniel reached for Margaret's hand, lifting it gently as though it were something precious. "You have given this town more than words," he murmured softly. "You have given it perspective." She squeezed his hand tenderly. "And you have given me courage," she answered. Their voices blended with the soft murmur of the saloon, carried on the glow of lantern light and the warmth of understanding. The gambler raised his glass of water once more. "To new beginnings," he said with quiet sincerity. One by one, others followed, lifting their glasses in silent tribute. "To new beginnings," they echoed. Margaret lifted her own glass, her smile gentle and sincere. "To respect," she said softly. Daniel added, "To truth." The piano player concluded with a graceful flourish, and the notes lingered in the air like a promise carried on the night wind. Beyond the windows, the vast American frontier stretched endlessly beneath the starlit sky, untouched and eternal. And within the humble walls of the Red Hollow Saloon, beneath the steady glow of lantern light, hearts once hardened by prejudice softened into understanding. In that quiet moment, Margaret Whitmore's dignity illuminated more than a room. It illuminated a town, proving that grace possesses a strength no mockery can diminish, and that true honor rises not from appearance, but from the courage to stand with kindness when the world expects you to falter. The final echoes of the toast drifted through the saloon like a warm breeze across an open prairie, settling gently into every corner of the room. Lantern light flickered softly against the weathered walls, casting long shadows that swayed like silent witnesses to the transformation unfolding within Red Hollow. Outside, the desert night stretched vast and endless beneath a canopy of stars, each one shimmering with quiet promise. The distant sound of hooves against packed earth and the whisper of wind through the wooden boardwalk blended into a lullaby of the frontier, timeless and unhurried. Margaret Whitmore sat with serene composure, her presence luminous in the golden glow, the silver magnolia brooch at her collar gleaming like a beacon of legacy and grace. Daniel Whitmore watched her with steadfast pride, his gaze gentle yet resolute, reflecting the deep respect he had always held for the woman beside him. He had seen her endure long miles beneath a relentless sun, had witnessed her quiet courage when the world offered judgment instead of kindness, and now he saw that same courage transform an entire town. Around them, the people of Red Hollow spoke in softened tones, their earlier mockery replaced by thoughtful reflection. A rancher near the door recounted stories of the Ashbury surveys, tales passed down through generations about the fairness and foresight that had once shaped the valley. The bartender listened intently, nodding as understanding deepened in his eyes. "Seems this town was built on more than dust and timber," he murmured. "Seems it was built on vision." Margaret inclined her head graciously. "Vision endures only when it is guided by compassion," she replied gently. Her voice carried across the room like the steady toll of a distant bell, calm and certain. The piano player, moved by the quiet dignity of the moment, shifted into a hopeful melody, its notes rising like dawn over the horizon. A young couple seated near the window exchanged thoughtful glances, as though witnessing not merely a revelation but a lesson meant to shape their own future. The gambler who had once mocked her leaned against the bar, his hat pressed respectfully to his chest. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "tonight you reminded us what honor truly looks like." Margaret met his gaze with warmth rather than triumph. "Honor is not something we claim," she answered softly. "It is something we live." Daniel's hand found hers once more, his touch steady and reassuring. "And you have lived it beautifully," he said with quiet sincerity. She smiled gently, gratitude shining in her eyes, for she knew that respect born of truth was far more enduring than admiration born of fear. Outside, a cool breeze swept across the plains, stirring the dust along Main Street and rustling the hitching posts where horses rested beneath the starlight. The vast American frontier stretched beyond the town, silent and infinite, as though listening to the unspoken promise carried within the night. The saloon doors creaked softly as they opened to the cool air, and the lantern flames trembled, casting a golden glow upon the threshold. Daniel rose, offering his arm with quiet courtesy. Margaret accepted, her posture graceful and assured, her presence radiant in its quiet strength. As they stepped toward the doorway, the room fell silent once more. One by one, the patrons removed their hats in reverence, a gesture of respect offered not to wealth or lineage alone, but to dignity revealed through grace. The piano's final note lingered like a blessing as the couple passed beneath the lantern light and into the starlit street. Outside, the night embraced them with gentle stillness, the desert wind whispering across the horizon as if carrying their story into the vastness of the west. They walked side by side beneath the endless sky, their silhouettes framed by moonlight, leaving behind a town forever changed by a single moment of truth. And as the lantern glow faded behind them, Red Hollow understood that real strength was not measured by appearance or pride, but by the courage to stand with kindness, the grace to speak with dignity, and the wisdom to recognize honor when it stands before you in silence. The cool night air wrapped gently around Margaret and Daniel Whitmore as they stepped onto the quiet boardwalk of Red Hollow, the soft glow of lantern light fading behind them like the last ember of a dying fire. Above, the vast American sky stretched endlessly, scattered with silver stars that shimmered against the velvet darkness. A gentle breeze carried the scent of sagebrush across the open plains, whispering through the wooden storefronts and stirring the dust along Main Street. The town lay hushed beneath the moonlight, as though pausing to reflect on the lesson it had just learned. Daniel offered his arm with quiet tenderness, and Margaret accepted, her gloved hand resting lightly upon his sleeve. Together, they walked slowly along the boardwalk, their footsteps echoing softly against the aged planks, steady and unhurried. The silver magnolia brooch at Margaret's collar caught the moonlight, glinting like a distant star, a symbol not merely of lineage but of quiet strength and enduring grace. Behind them, the saloon doors opened once more, releasing a spill of golden light into the night. The bartender stepped onto the threshold, removing his hat as he called respectfully, "Mrs. Whitmore." Margaret turned gently, her expression warm and serene. "Yes," she replied. The man hesitated, then spoke with sincerity. "Your father's dream lives on. Red Hollow will remember tonight." Margaret inclined her head with quiet humility. "Then let it be remembered not for me," she answered softly, "but for the understanding that followed." The bartender nodded solemnly before retreating inside, the doors swinging shut with a gentle creak. As silence returned, Daniel regarded his wife with a look of deep admiration. "You changed them," he said quietly. Margaret shook her head, her smile tender beneath the pale glow of moonlight. "No," she replied. "Truth did. I merely gave it a voice." They continued down the street, passing shuttered shops and silent hitching posts, where horses rested beneath the glow of starlight. The rhythmic chirping of crickets filled the stillness, blending with the distant rustle of wind across the prairie. Each step carried them farther from the echoes of mockery and closer to a future shaped by respect. At the edge of town, they paused beside their wagon, its wooden wheels dusted with the pale silver of moonlight. Daniel helped Margaret up with gentle care, his touch steady and reassuring. She settled onto the seat, gazing out across the open land that stretched for miles beneath the night sky. The horizon shimmered faintly in the distance, promising dawn and new beginnings. Daniel climbed beside her, gathering the reins with practiced ease. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply sat together, listening to the quiet heartbeat of the frontier. Finally, Margaret broke the silence, her voice soft as the breeze. "Do you believe they will remember?" Daniel looked back toward the distant lantern glow of Red Hollow, now dim against the darkness. "Yes," he said, "because they did not witness power. They witnessed dignity." Margaret's eyes reflected the starlight, calm and thoughtful. "Then perhaps this town will become what my father once imagined," she whispered. Daniel smiled gently. "With people like you to guide it, I have no doubt." He flicked the reins lightly, and the horses began to move, their hooves creating a slow, steady rhythm upon the dirt road. As the wagon rolled forward, the town receded behind them, its lanterns flickering like fading constellations. The wind swept softly across the plains, carrying with it the promise of a new dawn. In the quiet glow of the moonlit frontier, Margaret Whitmore sat beside her husband, her presence radiant with grace and resolve. And as Red Hollow slept beneath the endless sky, the truth she had spoken lingered in its heart, proving that real strength does not demand attention, but earns it through kindness, and that honor, once revealed, echoes far beyond a single night, carried gently on the timeless winds of the American West. The wagon rolled steadily along the pale ribbon of road stretching beyond Red Hollow, its wooden wheels turning with a gentle rhythm that echoed across the silent plains. Above them, the heavens shimmered with countless stars, each one casting a faint silver glow upon the sleeping frontier. The cool desert breeze drifted through the night air, carrying the scent of sagebrush and distant earth, while the soft jingle of harness chains blended with the steady hoofbeats of their horses. Margaret Whitmore sat beside Daniel, her posture graceful and composed, her gaze fixed upon the endless horizon where darkness met the promise of dawn. The silver magnolia brooch at her collar glimmered beneath the moonlight, a quiet testament to legacy, dignity, and the enduring power of truth. Behind them, the lanterns of Red Hollow faded into the distance, flickering like scattered embers against the velvet sky. Though the town lay quiet, its spirit had been stirred, and its people would carry the memory of that night for generations. Daniel held the reins with practiced ease, his hands steady and sure, guiding the horses along the familiar trail that led to their homestead. He glanced toward Margaret, his eyes softened with admiration. "You changed something tonight," he said gently, his voice as calm as the open plains. Margaret turned toward him, her expression thoughtful and serene. "I did not change them," she replied softly. "I simply reminded them of what they already knew but had forgotten." Her words drifted into the stillness like a prayer carried on the wind. Daniel smiled faintly, his gaze returning to the road ahead. "Sometimes," he said, "a reminder is all it takes to bring truth back into the light." The horses pressed onward, their breath visible in the cool night air, while the distant silhouette of rolling hills rose against the starlit sky. A lone coyote called somewhere beyond the horizon, its haunting cry echoing across the vast expanse of the American West. The sound faded into silence, leaving only the quiet harmony of nature and the gentle creak of the wagon wheels. As they reached the crest of a low ridge, Margaret looked back one final time. Red Hollow lay nestled in the valley below, its faint glow softened by distance, a small beacon of humanity amid the boundless wilderness. She reflected on the evening's events, not with pride, but with gratitude, for she knew that respect earned through truth endured far longer than admiration born of fear. "My father always believed that land shapes the hearts of those who walk upon it," she said quietly. "Tonight, I believe he was right." Daniel nodded. "And you have shaped this land in return," he replied. Margaret shook her head gently, her smile warm and humble. "No," she said, "it is kindness that shapes the world. I only spoke what needed to be spoken." The first faint blush of dawn began to rise along the eastern horizon, a soft ribbon of pale gold stretching across the sky. The stars slowly surrendered to the coming light, and the chill of night gave way to the promise of morning. The prairie awakened with subtle life as birds stirred in distant trees and the wind whispered through tall grass. As the wagon descended the ridge, the outline of their homestead emerged in the distance, its silhouette framed by the gentle glow of daybreak. The familiar sight filled Daniel with quiet contentment, and he guided the horses forward with renewed purpose. Margaret watched the sunrise unfold, her eyes reflecting its golden radiance. In its light, the trials of the night seemed to fade, replaced by hope and quiet certainty. The world stretched before them, vast and unbroken, offering endless possibilities beneath the open sky. And as the first rays of dawn touched the land once charted by her father, Margaret Whitmore sat beside her husband in serene silence, her heart at peace. For she understood that true strength was not found in appearance or pride, but in grace, compassion, and the courage to stand with dignity when the world demanded otherwise. And so, beneath the awakening sun of the American frontier, they journeyed onward together, leaving behind not merely a town, but a legacy renewed by truth, carried gently upon the timeless winds of the West. The first light of morning stretched gently across the prairie as Daniel guided the wagon toward their homestead, the rising sun painting the land in hues of amber and gold. A soft mist clung to the grass, shimmering like silver threads in the dawn, while a meadowlark's clear song drifted through the cool air, welcoming the new day. The modest ranch stood ahead, framed by a weathered wooden fence and a small barn whose red paint had faded beneath years of sun and wind. Smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney, a silent promise of warmth and home. Margaret Whitmore gazed upon the familiar sight with quiet contentment, her silver magnolia brooch catching the morning light as it rested gently against her collar. Beside her, Daniel steadied the reins, his posture relaxed yet purposeful, his eyes reflecting both pride and peace. "We are home," he said softly, his voice warm with gratitude. Margaret smiled, her expression serene as she looked across the rolling fields. "Home," she repeated gently, savoring the word as though it were a cherished melody. The wagon came to a gentle halt before the porch, and Daniel stepped down first, offering his hand with the same unwavering courtesy he had shown her since the day they met. She accepted with grace, her boots touching the earth with quiet assurance. The morning sun bathed the ranch in golden light, illuminating rows of grazing cattle in the distance and the sturdy windmill turning slowly against the horizon. A gentle breeze rustled through the tall grass, carrying the scent of hay and wildflowers. For a moment, they stood in silence, taking in the tranquility that surrounded them. Daniel glanced toward Margaret with a thoughtful expression. "Red Hollow will remember you," he said. "Perhaps," she replied softly, "but I hope it remembers kindness more than it remembers me." He nodded, understanding the humility woven into her words. As they approached the porch, Margaret paused beside a small wooden chest resting near the doorway. She knelt carefully, lifting its lid to reveal neatly folded parchment, documents secured with a faded ribbon. The inked signatures bore the mark of Thomas Ashbury, her father, drawn with deliberate precision decades earlier. Daniel watched quietly as she held one of the deeds, its edges softened by time. "These belong here," she said gently. "This land was meant to serve the people, not to be claimed as a symbol of power." Her voice carried neither pride nor regret, only purpose. Daniel's gaze softened. "What will you do?" he asked. Margaret folded the document carefully and closed the chest. "I will return to Red Hollow tomorrow," she replied. "I will ensure that the Ashbury grant remains a foundation for fairness, just as my father intended. A school, perhaps. A clinic. A place where every person is treated with dignity." Daniel smiled, admiration shining in his eyes. "Then this valley's future will be brighter because of you." She shook her head gently. "Not because of me," she corrected. "Because of what is right." The morning sun climbed higher, casting long beams of light across the fields, and the windmill turned steadily, its quiet rhythm echoing the heartbeat of the land. A pair of doves lifted into the sky, their wings catching the sunlight as they soared above the ranch. Margaret stepped onto the porch, her gaze sweeping across the endless horizon, where the promise of opportunity stretched as far as the eye could see. Daniel joined her, standing at her side with quiet devotion. Together, they looked out upon the land her father had once charted, now alive with hope and possibility. In that peaceful moment, the burdens of the past gave way to the promise of the future, and the legacy of Thomas Ashbury found new life in the hands of his daughter. The prairie breeze whispered gently through the grass, carrying with it the spirit of the frontier and the enduring truth that dignity, once revealed, can shape the destiny of generations. And as the golden light of morning spread across the American West, Margaret Whitmore stood beside her husband, her heart resolute, ready to honor her father's dream not through power, but through compassion, proving that the quiet strength of grace can build a future as vast and enduring as the open sky. The following morning dawned with a quiet brilliance that bathed the Whitmore ranch in gentle gold, as though the land itself had awakened to honor a promise long forgotten. Sunlight spilled across the rolling fields, illuminating dew-kissed blades of grass that shimmered like scattered diamonds beneath the wide American sky. A soft breeze stirred the prairie, carrying with it the scent of wildflowers and fresh hay, while the rhythmic creak of the windmill turned steadily against the horizon. Margaret Whitmore stood upon the porch, her silver magnolia brooch catching the early light, its delicate petals gleaming as a symbol of heritage and hope. Beside her rested the wooden chest containing her father's documents, the inked signatures of Thomas Ashbery preserved with reverence and care. Daniel Whitmore joined her, his boots sounding softly against the wooden boards as he carried 2 cups of steaming coffee. He offered one with a gentle smile, and she accepted it with quiet gratitude. Together, they watched the sunrise stretch across the plains, the world unfolding before them in hues of amber and rose. "It is a beautiful morning," Daniel said softly. Margaret nodded, her gaze steady upon the horizon. "It feels like the beginning of something new," she replied. The memory of Red Hollow lingered in her thoughts, not as a place of cruelty, but as a town transformed by truth. She recalled the humbled faces, the lowered hats, and the quiet understanding that had replaced ridicule. Her heart held no resentment, only resolve. Setting her cup upon the railing, she opened the wooden chest once more, lifting a parchment sealed with her father's mark. The edges had softened with time, yet the script remained bold and unwavering. "My father believed this land should serve every person who called it home," she said gently. "It was never meant to divide, but to unite." Daniel listened with quiet admiration, his gaze warm. "And now you will carry his vision forward," he said. Margaret smiled, her expression calm and resolute. "We will carry it forward," she corrected. Together, as the sun climbed higher, the ranch awakened with gentle life. A pair of doves fluttered from the barn roof, their wings flashing silver in the morning light, while cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. The steady rhythm of hooves echoed faintly across the fields as a neighboring rancher passed along the far ridge, lifting his hat in greeting. Margaret returned the gesture with a graceful nod, her presence dignified yet welcoming. The world seemed to breathe with quiet harmony, as though the frontier itself acknowledged her purpose. Later that morning, Daniel hitched the horses to the wagon, their harnesses gleaming beneath the rising sun. He secured the chest of documents with careful precision, ensuring that the legacy it contained would travel safely back to Red Hollow. Margaret stepped down from the porch, her boots touching the earth with calm assurance. She paused to gaze once more upon the land stretching endlessly before her, the very ground her father had once surveyed with hope in his heart. "Today we return," she said softly, "not to claim what is ours, but to share what was meant for all." Daniel nodded, pride shining in his eyes. "And they will remember you not for your name," he replied, "but for your kindness." Margaret smiled, her voice as gentle as the prairie wind. "If they remember anything, let it be this, that dignity belongs to every soul, and respect is the foundation upon which a true community is built." With that, she climbed into the wagon, her posture poised and serene. Daniel gathered the reins, and with a soft command, the horses began to move. The wheels turned slowly at first, then steadily, carving faint tracks through the dust as they set out toward the distant town. The sun rose higher, bathing the land in radiant light, and the wind carried their journey forward with quiet purpose. As the ranch receded behind them, Margaret Whitmore looked ahead with calm determination, her father's dream resting safely at her side. The vast American West stretched before them, boundless and full of promise, and in its golden light, a new chapter began, one shaped not by power or pride, but by compassion, fairness, and the enduring strength of grace. The wagon rolled steadily toward Red Hollow beneath the warm glow of the rising sun, its wooden wheels carving gentle lines into the dusty road as the vast American West unfolded before Margaret and Daniel Whitmore. Golden lights stretched across the prairie, illuminating fields of waving grass that shimmered like a living sea beneath the boundless sky. A soft breeze carried the scent of sage and wildflowers, whispering through the land with quiet reverence, as though the frontier itself anticipated what was yet to come. Margaret sat with composed grace, her gloved hands resting upon the wooden chest that held her father's documents, while the silver magnolia brooch at her collar glinted softly in the morning light. Beside her, Daniel guided the horses with steady confidence, his posture relaxed yet purposeful, his eyes fixed upon the distant outline of the town. As they approached, the rooftops of Red Hollow emerged from the valley like a promise fulfilled, their weathered boards glowing beneath the sun. The church steeple rose above the buildings, and the faint ring of a blacksmith's hammer echoed through the air, blending with the sounds of a town awakening to a new day. Word of Margaret's revelation had spread quickly, and by the time the wagon reached Main Street, townsfolk gathered quietly along the boardwalks. Men removed their hats. Women offered gentle nods. Even children paused in their play, their curious eyes filled with wonder rather than judgment. Respect, once withheld, now greeted her with quiet sincerity. Daniel brought the wagon to a gentle halt before the town hall, its whitewashed facade standing proudly beneath the open sky. He stepped down first and offered his hand. Margaret accepted with graceful dignity, her boots touching the earth with calm assurance. The murmurs of the crowd softened into silence as she lifted the wooden chest and carried it forward, Daniel walking faithfully at her side. The mayor, a silver-haired man with kind eyes, stepped onto the porch, his hat held respectfully against his chest. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said with solemn warmth, "Red Hollow welcomes you." Margaret inclined her head gently. "Thank you," she replied, her voice clear and serene. "I come not to claim this land, but to honor the purpose for which it was entrusted to my family." She opened the chest and carefully withdrew the parchment bearing her father's seal. The inked signature of Thomas Ashbury gleamed beneath the sunlight, its presence commanding reverence without demand. "My father believed that this valley should be a place of opportunity," she continued softly. "He envisioned a community built on fairness, learning, and compassion. Today, I fulfill his wish." A hush fell over the gathered townsfolk as she handed the document to the mayor. "This land," she declared gently, "is hereby entrusted to the people of Red Hollow, to establish a school and a clinic, so that every child may learn and every family may find care." For a moment, no one spoke. Then the mayor's eyes filled with gratitude. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "your generosity will shape this town for generations." A rancher stepped forward, removing his hat. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "we judged you wrongly. Please accept our gratitude and our promise to honor your father's vision." Margaret smiled with gentle warmth. "The past is behind us," she replied. "Let kindness guide what comes next." Applause rose slowly, heartfelt and sincere, echoing through the streets of Red Hollow like the dawn of a new era. Daniel looked upon his wife with quiet pride, his eyes shining with admiration as he took her hand. The church bell rang softly, its resonant chime carrying across the valley, marking not just the passage of time, but the birth of a brighter future. As the crowd dispersed, Margaret and Daniel stood together beneath the clear western sky, the morning sun illuminating the path ahead. The wind stirred gently, lifting the edges of her dress and whispering through the town like a blessing. In that moment, Red Hollow understood that true nobility was not measured by appearance or wealth, but by the courage to stand with dignity and the compassion to uplift others. And as the American frontier stretched endlessly beyond the horizon, Margaret Whitmore's quiet strength became a legacy etched not in stone, but in the hearts of those she inspired, proving that justice does not need a gun to prevail, only a voice brave enough to speak with grace.